A measure to defund Planned Parenthood failed in the Senate Monday. The vote fell short of the 60 votes needed to move forward with the legislation. Only two Democrats, Senators Joe Donnelly and Joe Manchin, voted for the legislation, while two Republicans, Senator Mark Kirk and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, voted against it. The bill was fast-tracked to the floor after the release of videos that show Planned Parenthood officials discussing fetal tissue from abortions. Here are Senate Republicans and Democrats speaking on the Senate floor before the vote.
The revelations we've seen from Planned Parenthood are deeply disturbing. They raise real, fundamental questions about what kind of society we want to be. So I want to thank Senators Ernst, Paul, Langford, and a number of others for accepting my invitation to lead the effort on the Senate's response. The legislation they worked to develop is all about restoring America's commitment to care and to compassion. It would fund women's health, not Planned Parenthood. And we'll take a vote to advance it tonight. Instead of subsidizing a political group, this bill would protect federal funding for health services for women. Instead of subsidizing a political group, this bill would ensure funds continue to flow to community health centers and hospitals that provide more comprehensive health services and may have many, many more facilities nationwide. And instead of subsidizing a political group, this bill would help women receive health services like screenings, prenatal and postnatal care, well child care, diagnostic laboratory and radiology services, immunizations, and other care that they need. Now that, Mr. President, is a true commitment to women's health. That is real compassion. I know Democrats have relied on Planned Parenthood as an ally recently, but they must be moved by the horrifying images we've all seen. They must be shocked by the utter lack of compassion that's been on display. They must care about women's health as much as they care about some scandal-plagued political organization. That's why tonight I'm asking them to truly reflect on what's important. I'm asking them not to block this funding for women's health just to protect some political group mired in scandal. Women deserve better, and our country deserves better.
Here's an excerpt from an article in the Republican leader's hometown newspaper, the Louisville Courier-Journal, and I quote, "Sarah Hall started going to Planned Parenthood when she was in her late teens and needed birth control. She's gotten the care there ever since. Without them, I wouldn't have a doctor to see. I don't know where I would have gone. It would have meant I wouldn't get the care I needed," close quote. Like Sarah, millions of American women depend on Planned Parenthood for much-needed health services. Every year, Planned Parenthood helps women, just like Sarah, get important service they need, such as birth control measures. But it's more than just birth control. Here are just a few of the health services that Planned Parenthood provides to American women. And they did it, for example, in 2013. 500,000 women went to Planned Parenthood for breast cancer screening. 400,000 women received a cervical exam from Planned Parenthood's medical staff. And 4.5 million treatments and tests for sexually transmitted diseases and infections were performed. Yet, here we are once again, faced with another Republican attempt to limit women's access to health care. A few hours from now, the Senate will vote on a Republican bill to defund Planned Parenthood. Let's understand what that vote means. Defunding Planned Parenthood would limit America's women access to critical health services like contraception, breast and cancer screenings, and women visits. This legislation is just another Republican attack on the health care of millions of women, like Sarah from Kentucky. Over the past months, Republicans have worked to trick American women into believing that Republicans don't really want to limit women's access to contraceptives or other critical health services provided by Planned Parenthood. But votes like the one we're going to take in a couple hours lay bare the truth. The cold, hard fact is that a vote to defund Planned Parenthood is a vote to limit access of women to cancer screenings, contraceptives, and other important services Planned Parenthood provides. Our nation is already facing a shortage of primary care providers. For many women, Planned Parenthood is their preferred medical provider. 1 in 5 American women will go to Planned Parenthood for services at some time during their lives. Defunding Planned Parenthood and reducing the number of providers available for women to receive contraceptives, other critical health services would reduce women's success to good health and, more importantly, their access to care, which is very direct and to the point. To put it another way, the demand for care would still exist, but there would be fewer providers to render this care. And for many women, Planned Parenthood may be the only provider where they can seek medical help. Republicans are trying to eliminate their access to health centers. Last Thursday, I listened to the senior senator from Texas, where he claimed that this bill that we're going to vote on soon would actually increase access to care for women. I'm surprised. This distinguished member of the Senate, longtime member of the Texas Supreme Court, would say something like that. He and other Republicans believe, I guess, that clinics like community health centers will pick up the slack should Planned Parenthood be defunded. That is simply not true. I am a strong supporter of community health centers. It's part of the Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, because I believe in community health centers. We put billions of dollars in that bill. And it's during the years that it's been in existence, it's done so much to provide help for community health centers. But we still have far, far much to do. There aren't enough community health centers, even with what we've done, to increase their ability to meet the current demand. And to throw in a few more women who would be knocked out of Planned Parenthood, and few is a pejorative term, it would be millions of women, is wrong. The director of women's health policy at the Kaiser Family Foundation says, and I quote, "Across the nation, community health centers are already at capacity," close quote. Taking a look, for example, at the assistant Republican leader's home state of Texas. A recent report from George Washington University detailed what it would take for other providers to replace Planned Parenthood, exactly what the senior senator from Texas has suggested. Take, for example, in Midland County, Texas, there would have to be an increase of 537% by non-Planned Parenthood clinics. Planned Parenthood is defunded. In Lubbock County, it would see an increase of 250%. Community health centers can't handle that, or can they handle the increase of heavily populated Dallas County, where it's almost a 200% increase? What the Republican legislation does is make it nearly impossible for women who need medical attention to get the care they need. And if women can't go get health care from Planned Parenthood, where do they go? Take a look at what happened in the state of Indiana 2011, when the state's legislature voted to deny state funding for Planned Parenthood health centers. Republicans then argued that other health care providers would bridge the gap and absorb Planned Parenthood patients. They asserted that other providers would take care of those women just fine. So what are those other health care providers for women that Indiana Republicans said could take the place of state's Planned Parenthood health centers? Prisons, listen to this, prisons, they suggested, juvenile detention centers, and homeless shelters. These are certainly not the kinds of places my Republican colleagues would want to send their daughters, sisters, or wives for care. It's common sense. If you take away Planned Parenthood health centers, women will have no ability to access care, and most will go without the care they need. A Republican senior senator from Maine agrees. Here's what she said, and I quote, "The problem is, in my state and many others, Planned Parenthood is the primary provider of health services in certain parts of our state for women. So I don't know how you would ensure that all the patients in Planned Parenthood would be absorbed by alternative care providers," close quote. In Nevada, Planned Parenthood centers there have served about 22,000 patients a year. Where do these patients go if Republicans legislation works? I don't know. They won't get the care they need, that's for sure. Senate Republicans are not being fair to American women. They're trying to shift the responsibility to someone who doesn't exist. It's our responsibility in the Senate to assure that American women have access to care. It's our obligation to protect our wives, our sisters, our daughters, our granddaughters, and protect them from the absurd policies of a Republican Party that has lost its moral compass. Today, Senate Republicans will do just that. The Planned Parenthood bill isn't going anywhere in the Senate. Senate Democrats will fight vigorously this and any other attempt from Republicans to deprive American women of health care.
Madam President, as the presiding officer knows, we will have a very important vote about an hour and a half from now on a bill that would eliminate taxpayer funding for abortions consistent with 4 decades of U.S. law. And contrary to the comments made by our friend from Oregon who just spoke, rather than withhold those funds, it would take that same amount of money and redirect it for women's health services and actually give them better access to health services at the same time. In other words, this legislation will fund women's health care, but not abortions on the taxpayer's dime. I particularly want to thank the Senator Ernst, Senator Langford, Senator Fisher, and Senator Paul for their leadership on this important issue. This is the beginning of the fight to regain America's conscience and the fight to restore the law that's been on the books for 40 years when it comes to taxpayer funding of abortions. We all understand that the Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade has held that abortion is a right. But we also know that there is a rare area where there is a consensus between pro-choice and pro-life people like myself, and that is we draw the line and have since 1976 when it comes to taxpayer funding of abortions. Of course, what brought us here to this point most immediately was because our collective conscience was shocked by videos depicting Planned Parenthood executives discussing the harvesting and sale of the organs of unborn babies, an abhorrent, disgusting practice that we cannot ignore. Perhaps the only thing more shocking than the actual dismembering of unborn children for sale is the cavalier attitude by the Planned Parenthood staff, who seem to have sacrificed their humanity and show so little regard for the sanctity of human life. What was shown in these videos is an outrage, and it demands our action. Now, many of our colleagues from across the aisle have cited their own disapproval of what's presented in these videos, and they'll be given an opportunity at 5:30 when we vote on the motion to proceed to get on this bill to demonstrate that their actions actually match their words. According to one report, the junior senator from Indiana said he found the comments by Planned Parenthood personnel in the video disgraceful. And similarly, the junior senator from Virginia has said he found the videos extremely troubling. When asked about the videos last week, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton also called them disturbing, and they are. So, Madam President, like our recent successful bipartisan efforts to fight the scourge of human trafficking, we have a rare opportunity to make a difference and address the moral imperative to defend those who cannot defend themselves. And it's important, because I've already heard some of our colleagues misrepresent what's in the bill, to remind everybody what this bill actually does. First and foremost, it eliminates federal funding from one of the country's largest abortion providers, Planned Parenthood. In fiscal year 2014, Planned Parenthood performed 327,653 abortions. At the same time, Planned Parenthood received $528 million from federal taxpayers. Planned Parenthood reported revenue in fiscal year 2014 of $1.1 billion, In other words, almost half of its income came from tax dollars from the federal government. At the same time, they performed 327,653 abortions. Now, you'll hear some of our friends who are defending Planned Parenthood say, oh, well, this is different because the money is kept separate. But we know that money that comes from the federal government can keep the lights on and keep the doors open so the abortions can continue to be performed, and it is simply a fiction to claim that federal tax dollars are not supporting conduct proscribed by the Hyde Amendment for the last 40 years. We don't stop there, though, when it comes to this legislation. As I mentioned at the outset, we would actually redirect the money to ensure that taxpayer dollars that once went to Planned Parenthood now go to provide for women's health, like in thousands of community health centers across the country. I'm a big fan of community health centers because they really represent one-stop shopping when it comes to primary health care needs. And the ironic thing is we can actually provide better access, more access for women by transferring the money from Planned Parenthood to community health centers and other non-abortion providers. For example, in my state, we have as many as 8 times more community health centers as there are Planned Parenthood providers. So we can provide women with 8 times more opportunity to see that their health care needs are taken care of, and at the same time respect the law that prohibits taxpayer dollars to be used for abortions and to support abortions. In fact, according to data from 2013, the most recently available nationwide, every state in the country has more community health centers than Planned Parenthood clinics. Since I didn't want to mention all 50 of them here, that would be a little overwhelming and be hard to read at the same time. I just picked out 2 states along with the nationwide statistic, 13 community health centers to every 1 Planned Parenthood provider that would still be able to provide primary health care services to women under this legislation. But if you look at Indiana, for example, Indiana, you would have 4 times more providers under this legislation. And in the state of Virginia, 20 times more providers by simply defunding Planned Parenthood, the abortion provider, using tax dollars and transferring that money to community health centers. You could actually provide greater access for women's health care. So let's be clear, because I suspect, as I've already heard when I came to the floor, there'll be a lot of misrepresentation about what's in the bill. But we need to be clear, this legislation defends women's health and it ensures women access across the country to essential health services. As I said a few moments ago, Madam President, in many respects the debate that we're having was already decided in 1976, the year of the Hyde Amendment, named after Henry Hyde, which, as my colleagues all know, prevents taxpayer dollars from funding abortions, except in some rare circumstances. We talked about that a lot during the course of the anti-human trafficking bill, but this has been the law of the land for 40 years. So I would strongly encourage all of our colleagues to vote to get on this bill. An organization that so callously reduces our most vulnerable to spare parts for sale has no business receiving any money from the federal taxpayers. What people want to do with their own money, or if people want to raise money from other private sources to support this effort, then let them do that. But tax dollars are not available and should not be available to fund Planned Parenthood's abortion practice, again, the largest single abortion provider in America. While many of our colleagues on the other side have agreed that the vile practices that we witnessed in these videos are disturbing, still some have tried to put off having this discussion at all. I think what would be the biggest failure on our part, no matter what the outcome of our vote on the underlying legislation, but would be to fail to have this discussion and this debate for the American people to hear so we can get their input. That would be a real travesty, is if we shut off debate because 60 senators didn't see fit to vote to get on the bill. And that vote, again, we'll be having in an hour, roughly an hour and 15 minutes. There are others who say we simply have more important things to do. I disagree. For example, the senior senator from New York said consideration of this bill was, quote, wasting valuable time, and that we should instead start urgent budget negotiations. Really? Really? I hardly know what to say. So to those who share my disgust for the conduct depicted in these videos and agree that they are disgraceful, disturbing, and extremely troubling, how can you now turn around and refuse to vote with us to get on this legislation so we can have that discussion, so we can have that debate, and so we can vote our conscience? If your conscience is shocked by the footage in these videos, I really can't see how anybody could possibly vote no on this legislation at 5:30 when we vote to get on the bill. Somehow, we as a nation have been lulled into a sense of complacency and have become somehow so desensitized to these barbaric practices depicted in these videos that it no longer stimulates us to act. But today, we have a chance, on behalf of the American people, the people we collectively represent, to act, and to act in a way that protects the most vulnerable.
There comes a time in the history of nations when a civilized people must stand up and decide whether or not life is important, whether or not life is something special, and whether or not there's maybe something greater than just us that has to do with life. It sickens me to see what's been going on with Planned Parenthood. Some of my first memories of my children were the ultrasound that I saw before they were born. We still keep those. We now find out, though, that this technology that can do wonders, that can save babies, you can perform surgery now in the uterus and the baby can survive. These same techniques that are being used by Planned Parenthood to manipulate the baby into a position to harvest the baby's organs. I think all America should be sickened by this, but it should also trouble us if we are a society that's not sickened by this. And I think the time to come is to have a full-throated debate over this, and the time has come to end all taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood. Some will say, well, where will people get their health? We have 9,000 community health centers and 700 Planned Parenthood clinics. The only difference is abortion. In fact, you can get many things at a community health center you can't get at Planned Parenthood. But the only thing you get at Planned Parenthood that you can't get anywhere else is abortion. But this debate isn't just about abortion. This debate is about little babies who haven't given their consent. And it's about time we had a debate in our country about this, and it's about time we said enough's enough. The question is, can a civilization long endure that doesn't respect life? Do we lose everything else about what makes us human if we're unwilling to protect life? Can we stand up and defend our other rights if we're not willing to stand up and defend the most basic of rights? So I come here today to ask my fellow senators to vote to defund Planned Parenthood, and I hope they will. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I'd like to first interchange into a colloquy with Senator Daines. This is an area that's extremely passionate to many of us that are here in this body. And to be able to talk about Planned Parenthood, what is going on, and the basic issue about children. Now, this has been spun multiple different ways, but really this is not about a lot of other issues other than one thing. This is about children. Children that are recognizable out of the womb, that once they've been carved up and set out on a table to be sold at parts, can be plainly seen to be children that are there. So my conversation today really wants to just circle around a little bit about what are we doing, where are we headed, what is this vote all about this evening, and what is this debate that should begin here in America about what happens with Planned Parenthood. So I'd like to entertain just a conversation with Senator Daines.
I want to thank the senator from Oklahoma. Thank you for having this colloquy here today, because I do believe we are at a crossroads. With this vote that we'll have in about 20 minutes. We have a choice that's set before us, one that each one of us must make as a senator, and one that each American must make with us. With a yes vote, this yes vote is to defund Planned Parenthood. We reaffirm our dedication to women's health. In fact, we recommit every dollar made available to support things like well baby care, like cervical and breast cancer screenings, like prenatal and postpartum care, like immunizations, like family planning services, including contraception, like sexually transmitted disease testing, and relevant diagnostic, laboratory, and radiology services. This bill doesn't take a single dollar away from women's health. I think it's very important as we debate this decision in front of us that it doesn't get caught up with rhetoric. Let's get focused on the facts around what this does and what it doesn't do. This is a vote about our culture. This is a vote about our ethics. And most importantly, and I say this as a daddy of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, this is about the value of our children. Because over the last few weeks, we've seen these videos. Americans have been horrified of high-level Planned Parenthood executives who are callously discussing the price of baby organs harvested from the tiny bodies of aborted babies. In fact, just last week, we witnessed an abortion doctor poking through the pieces of this tiny and broken body. He was pointing out the heart and the lungs and discussing what each of them should cost when sold, meanwhile exclaiming, "It's a baby." And we've heard some of the arguments here today about, well, this is about the woman's body. We respect the body of the woman, and we want to make sure that the proper services are allowed to protect a woman's health. But this is not about the woman's body. This is about a different body with a different DNA. This is about a little baby. A baby that now has a price, not just on its head, but on literally every part, as these videos exposed. When we place a price on the outcome of the destruction of our children, we incentivize it. In another setting, we would call this price per specimen arrangement a bounty scheme. Because with potential for such financial gain, there's little wonder why there are 149 abortions to every 1 adoption referral at these clinics. 149 abortions to every 1 adoption referral at these clinics. And the discussions we heard are not exceptions or even the actions of a single clinic. This is a systemic issue within Planned Parenthood. We heard direct testimony that clinics act in concert with the consent of their corporate headquarters at Planned Parenthood, that no single clinic acts alone. We learned that an overarching legal department that works to build layers upon layers of defenses so that no one clinic is left holding the bag. Such a culture shows little regard for women's health. This is a culture that has been embroiled in a number of lawsuits about making false reimbursement claims to the federal government and helping to facilitate the covering up of sexual abuse and statutory rape. In fact, just last week, a complaint was filed with the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies against one of these clinics regarding a little 13-year-old girl who was sexually abused, had an abortion, and was returned to her abuser. No report was made by the clinic or the abortionist. Her parents were not contacted, all in violation of the laws of Colorado. So a no vote on this bill supports this culture. It devalues both the woman and that tiny little baby, that child. So we do have a choice today. We can work to change that culture if we choose to vote for women, if we would choose to vote yes. Because a yes vote redirects, again, let's get the facts straight here and separate it from the rhetoric. A yes vote redirects funds from Planned Parenthood and provides that money for women's health services to the numerous community health centers. You heard Senator Paul talk about 9,000 community clinics around the country versus 700 Planned Parenthood centers that would provide these dollars to those clinics, to local clinics, to hospitals, to other providers who already serve the majority of women. And I must tell you, I was deeply disturbed as a daddy of 4 in this most recent video where the doctor pokes around the aborted baby's parts until she found the legs, and she shouts, she exclaims, "It's another boy." There can be no denying what she was saying. We hear those words for the first time. I heard those words for the first time from a doctor during an ultrasound when Cindy and I were seeing the doctor as we were pregnant. Or that ecstatic phone call that comes from an expecting mom. Or as the new father takes that newborn son into his arms. That doctor was the same one to say, "It's a baby." There's no doubt that this is what the little boy is. It's a baby. I cannot support an organization that would place a dollar amount on body parts. I cannot support an organization that would incentivize his death. And that is why I will vote for this bill. And my vote will be a vote for women's health. And to be very clear, this bill won't touch 1 cent of funding for women's health, not 1 cent. That means that this vote is for one thing and one thing only. A yes vote is a vote for women. It is a vote for our children. And I urge my colleagues, let us vote for women. Let us vote for our children. Let us vote yes.
Mr. President, this ongoing conversation's happened. I'd like to be able to demonstrate a little bit of what we're really up against and what this really looks like in practical terms. I brought a chart with me here to be able to talk about when we talk about women's health. Because there's been this accusation that's sitting out there that this is about cutting off access to women's health. The chart that I have here, the one on the right here, shows all the Planned Parenthood licensed mammogram facilities. They'd be a dot on this map. If you're looking close to the map, you would see no dots on it. It's clear. There's not a single one. And the accusation is over and over again, if women are going to get access to mammograms, they have to be able to get to Planned Parenthood. The dirty secret is they refer to other locations. They recommend that you go get a mammogram, but Planned Parenthood doesn't do any of them. On the left here, these are the 8,000 plus facilities here on the dots on the map here where you can actually get a mammogram. We're talking about taking funding from a location that refers to it to the location that actually does the mammogram. This is about women's health, but it's also about the health of children. And I have a very difficult time talking about things like early childhood education on this floor with individuals that are passionate about early childhood education, but if that child was just a couple of years younger, they would have no issue with them being aborted and their body parts being sold. That's the same child. That is the same child that we're passionate about their early childhood education. That's the same child that we're passionate about the women and infant and children funding to make sure they get proper nutrition at birth. That is the same child. The only difference between that child in the womb and the child that's a preschooler is time. We just think it's extremely important in this incredibly divisive issue of abortion that we treat this seriously as a nation. And what has happened in the last couple of weeks with the Planned Parenthood videos coming out is, for the first time in a long time, this is not an invisible thing that's happening somewhere in secret. Now it is something that's actually happening where people can see it. And I think our culture, for the first time in a while, is having to slow down and deal with the reality of, is it possible that this culture has been wrong, that that really is a child? I talked last week to a friend of mine that his child was born a year ago at 14 ounces. 14 ounces was their birth weight. Born very, very premature. Their child is now 14 pounds a year later and doing extremely well. That 14-ounce child is a child that everyone sees now. But that 14-ounce child is exactly what Planned Parenthood was harvesting, was turning in the womb so they could crush the head and to be able to gather the organs to be able to sell. We as a culture have got to deal with this one simple reality. That child is important. This is not about Cecil the lion. This is not about whales at SeaWorld. This is about children. And maybe we as a culture should slow down and be able to answer that one simple question. But at least for this moment, with Planned Parenthood, to say to an organization where there are a couple things that are hanging over them right now that are very serious. One is, it's not legal under federal law to sell the parts of a human for profit. Now, that's still yet to be determined what was done. But it's also not legal to be able to change the timing, procedure, or method of an abortion to be able to gather organs to be sold. That is very clear in federal law as well. So if the method is changed, if the timing is changed, if the procedure is changed specifically to harvest organs, that's not legal. And in the videos over and over again, you hear doctors talking about how they changed the method, how they used the ultrasound to turn the child around, how they used a different technique than they would have normally done because they wanted to be able to gather these organs for sale. Those are serious accusations. These are children. We think it's entirely reasonable to say, let's take the funding that has been committed to Planned Parenthood, who is the single largest abortion provider in the country. 40% of their revenue comes from the federal taxpayer. 40%. For the single largest provider of abortion in the country to stop and to say, let's take that funding, let's commit it to organizations that do full women's health, mammograms, testing, contraceptives, the works. Not just recommending it to others and also do abortions, but that we would commit it to those individuals. With that, I'd like to be able to yield to the senator from Louisiana in this colloquy, and then I see my colleague as well from California that I think she would also like to be able to have a moment. Would you like to be able to speak a moment in our colloquy?
Yes, I was going to ask unanimous consent that following my friend from Louisiana, I be given 2 minutes.
Could we just swap it and go straight to you right now? Would that be appropriate?
Whatever you want.
Let's do that now.
Okay.
Then we'll come to it. Then we have a unanimous consent for an ongoing colloquy, and I'd be glad to be able to have you join in this conversation.
Okay. I want to thank my friend.
Senator from California.
I want to thank my friend for his generosity here. And I tell you, I really rather work with you on transportation. You know, I gave birth to 2 premature kids, and I just don't like lectures by men about what it's like. And thank God they made it. I'm pro-choice. And I just have to say, using pregnancy as a political football doesn't sit well with the people I represent and the people of this country. We have to respect one another. I respect your view entirely. I'm asking you to respect mine. Keep Uncle Sam out of my private life and my children's and my grandkids and yours. Families will make these decisions with their God, with their doctor. And 97% of the work Planned Parenthood does has nothing to do with abortion. It's primary health care, and may I put my entire statement in the record on that point?
Without objection.
And do you know, I have to say, in 2011, Republicans threatened to shut down the government if Planned Parenthood wasn't defunded. And I heard my friend from Washington, Patty Murray, say they were serious. Going to shut down the government? To deny health care to 2.7 million women and men every year? Some of them basic health care. I'll show you a particular person here. This is Doreen from California. I went to Planned Parenthood and I talked to the clinician. She gave me a referral to a breast care center where I had a mammogram and a biopsy, was ultimately diagnosed with breast cancer. I was scheduled for a lumpectomy in 2 weeks. That woman could have died. And you say go to community health care centers? First of all, I find it ironic because they were set up in Obamacare, and all of you voted no on Obamacare. We expanded community health care centers. I asked unanimous consent to place in the record a community health care center in California, Mr. President, who says they cannot take any more patients. They cannot take that, 700,000 patients. So they say to the women, go to community health care centers. They voted against Obamacare, expanded the community health care centers, and the community health care centers are saying, no, we're sorry. We can't do it. Planned Parenthood does a great job. So this is a continuation of the Republican war on women, and I hope we'll defeat this ill-considered bill that's about to come our way. Thank you.
Without objection, the request of the senator from California to insert into the record will be done so.
Mr. President,
Senator,
I'm honored to be able to continue this conversation because it is extremely important we continue this as a nation. Just to make a couple comments to you as well. I'm a dad of 2 daughters. I had something to do with the birth as well and was also there. I was there during the sonograms. My wife and I are extremely close. And to be a dad of 2 daughters, I'm very passionate not only about my own wife, but about my mom, who's a cancer survivor, multiple-time cancer survivor. I'm passionate about my daughters having every single opportunity. So this is important to us as well. This is not just a women's issue, this is a men's issue as well, because this is a family issue. And the family is extremely important to all of us. But I would say this, community health centers don't serve 2.3 million people like Planned Parenthood. Community health centers serve 23 million people around the country. There are around 650 Planned Parenthood locations around the country. There are 9,000 community health centers around the country. And the Planned Parenthood facilities refer people to go get breast cancer screening. The community health centers actually do that testing there. They actually do the mammogram there, not just say that you should get one. So this is about women's health, but it's also about efficiency of what we're going to be about. And so I would also say one other thing to Mr. President on that. I would say this issue about Obamacare and community health centers, the community health centers were funded in Obamacare, but they long pre-exist Obamacare. Community health centers are not an invention of Obamacare. There was a section of Obamacare that funded some of them an additional amount, but they've been around for decades and decades. They're an extremely efficient form of health care, especially to those on Medicaid. I'd like to be able to recognize a friend and a fellow senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm a physician, a doctor. For the last 25 years, I've worked in hospitals for the uninsured. And so my friend from California mentions the need to ensure access to those who might not otherwise afford. That is what I've been attempting to do in my medical practice for the last 25 years. And as a practicing physician, one of the first things you're taught in medical school is first do no harm. Tragically, these videos demonstrate that some do not share that perspective. Now, when patients see their doctor, they want an honest, objective opinion. But what the videos suggest is that Planned Parenthood puts profit and special interest before the women who call on them for their advice.
The senator should be advised that the time for the vote scheduled at 5:30 has arrived. He could ask unanimous consent for additional time if he so wishes.
Oh, is it 5:30 now? I'm sorry. If I have unanimous consent for another 2 minutes?
Is there objection?
Thank you.
Without objection.
Now, again, for 30 years I've been working to get health care for folks, and so I think it is important that we ensure access to women to health care. Currently, Planned Parenthood gets $500 million in federal funding per year. If we redirect this funding to the community health centers, which I have worked with for 30 years, the health can be better served. There are 2 Planned Parenthoods in Louisiana, and there's 160 community health centers. The 2 Planned Parenthood, one in New Orleans, one in Baton Rouge, the southeastern portion of the state. The community health centers are scattered all over the state. Again, there's 160. So for every American who is troubled by these videos, we should be equally troubled by the fact that the Planned Parenthood provision of health care is geographically centered in some areas, but not as broadly as the community health centers. I'll also point out as a physician that the Planned Parenthood model of care is outdated. We now talk about clinics which are medical homes, not which are siloed into only the provision of birth control pills and, in the case of Planned Parenthood, abortion. The community health centers can provide the whole range of services, including that for diabetes, hypertension, etc. It is time for Congress to act. I ask my colleagues to support this redistribution of money to closer to where those patients live, to better ensure a woman's access to health care, and to address the troubling issues raised by these videos. I yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa. Senator from Iowa.
I ask unanimous consent for one additional minute of
Reserving the right to object. I won't object if Senator Blumenthal can respond with 1 minute.
Is there objection? Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, the question before us today is clear. Who do we want to be as a nation? It is hard for anyone to defend these morally reprehensible videos as Planned Parenthood callously harvested the organs of unborn babies to be sold at a price. The American people, Republicans and Democrats alike, are horrified by the blatant disregard and utter lack of compassion shown by Planned Parenthood for these women and their babies. It's wrong. The American people know it, and they should be not asked to foot part of the bill. We can no longer turn a blind eye. This is human life, and Planned Parenthood, the nation's single largest provider of abortion services, is harvesting baby body parts. So before you now is a critical opportunity to vote for legislation that will protect the most vulnerable in our society and fund women's health.
That measure to defund Planned Parenthood failed in the Senate Monday. It did not get the 60 votes needed to move forward. But several news reports are saying that the issue could derail a government funding bill this September. Politico reports that the right flank of the GOP says it will refuse to vote for a spending bill that funds Planned Parenthood, and that spending bill must be approved by September 30th to avoid a shutdown.